Ringside Boxing Show, the hottest, sweatiest hour on West Coast radio.
Today's featured guest, Trisha Morrison, has spoken to us a couple of times before, as did her late husband, two-time heavyweight champ Tommy the Duke Morrison, whose career was cut short by what he and his wife always claimed was a false diagnosis of the HIV virus in his blood. Tommy was just 44 when he died. That was September of 2013. Trisha continues her fight to get all the facts out about his life and his death, and she joins us right now from her home in Wichita, Kansas. Trisha, welcome back. Thanks for coming on with us today. How are you?
Hi, Dennis. I'm doing good. Thank you very much.
Good deal. Well, I want to try to get to the center of this from your perspective right away by asking a question that we probably didn't adequately answer before time ran out on us the last time. What caused Tommy's death?
Stuff that hasn't been reported in the media. There's a whole list of medical blunders that occurred. As of December 1, 2011, he had surgery on his chest for an insect bite, which was either a tick or a brown recluse. And from that point onwards, for the next 21 months, it was sheer hell. The surgeon had left 12 foot of surgical gauze in his chest. He'd had most of his major and minor pec muscle from his chest removed.
Oh.
The finding of the gauze made him fall that night into a wall and twisted his neck, and the inability to walk and talk after that. He was in septic shock from the infected gauze. Throughout the 21 months, he was given an overdose of potassium. He was given an overdose of iron. His vocal cord, we found out, was half paralyzed, and he wasn't able to talk. One instance in one of the hospitals, they had turned the oxygen off to 0 instead of putting it to 100%. He started to turn blue, and we ended up in the ICU. In one hospital, he was given IV nutrition, and they had given him the wrong bag. It had no electrolytes in there for 3 days.
Oh,
he was on the ventilator for 5 times. He weaned himself off. His feeding tube was pulled out twice. And the kicker at the end was he was put into a medically induced coma. And he passed away 2 days later of cardiac arrest and septic shock. And people have always said, well, he died of AIDS. No, he didn't. The death certificate actually was issued on September 5, 2013, and the blood autopsy came back on September 18th, 2013. And they found no viral particles, no budding retroviruses, which is HIV, no Kaposi sarcoma, which Sam Mellinger had diagnosed from the Kansas City Star, and he had no AIDS-defining diseases. He passed all those tests. So that's it in a nutshell, Dennis.
Wow. So this all started in 1996 when Tommy was set up for a fight in Las Vegas against, I think, a guy named Arthur Weathers.
That's right.
A pre-fight blood test ordered by Nevada State Athletic Commission derailed all that. Pick up the story for us from there.
Right. Well, the story is becoming a little bit more clearer now. That 1996 test result that Tommy finally got actually did not have his Social Security number on there. It didn't have his date of birth. It was noted that it belonged to somebody aged 99 years old, and it was the results were actually never given to him on paper. And since my quest, getting the answers for Tommy, everything was done over the phone. But nobody knows who actually made that phone call to the Nevada Commission.
Wow. Okay. Talk to us a little bit. I know you weren't with Tommy when all that started. It was a few years later. But what about the impact of that diagnosis on Tommy Morrison from an emotional standpoint? He was a young, strong, positive-thinking guy. His livelihood was boxing. This test ended his boxing career, and for the most part, and basically affected I would think, every aspect of his life as well because of the stigma of HIV and AIDS.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, he writes about that in his second book that he wrote, My Darkest Years. And I'll read his exactly words. He felt very fragile with low self-esteem. He had so much on his mind. He had to gather his thoughts. It was easy for me to justify doing drugs, he said. I'd been told my life was ending any day. He said also in his book, everyone was terrified of me. No one would offer me a job. I was a liability. My life sucked. The depression and loneliness was overwhelming. I continued to just watch my career go past me. He said, people kept saying I was out of my mind, like I had 10 heads, and that God wasn't in the miracle business anymore. And he said people just rolled his eyes at him, and he says, it blew me away. It was a weird feeling. Nobody wanted to hear about what I was finding out in my research. I'm talking about my life here, and nobody wants to listen. So it was a horrific thing. I think it's a horrific thing for anybody that is misdiagnosed with HIV, what they go through. But this, I'm going to just tell Tommy's story only.
and they wouldn't even let him work out in a gym most of the time, right? Because
that's right.
They were afraid that they'd get his sweat on him or something.
Yep, they said people threatened to cancel their gym memberships if I were allowed to work out in certain gyms. I was often told to leave and go find another gym. People just rolled their eyes at me. It blew me away. So that's what he went through.
So we've told this story. Tommy told it once to us, and I had you tell it last time, but I want to tell it again for people who haven't heard it yet. Tommy got the diagnosis. He made the announcement in a press conference. Then he got into his truck and drove to Jay, Oklahoma, where he grew up. And it's a really conservative one-horse town in Oklahoma, small population. He knew everybody in town.
Right.
And this happened before you met him, but he wrote about it in one of those autobiographies. Tell people what happened to him in February of 1996 when he drove back to Jay, Oklahoma, the day of the press conference.
Well, again, I'm going to read Tommy's words.
Okay.
Because he wrote it. As he said, it's his life, his story. He says, well, I had just done the press conference in Tulsa where I had to say a bunch of right? I did not believe. It's puzzling. I've never felt more healthy in my life. Never had any symptoms whatsoever. I haven't been sick in years. I don't feel sick. I don't look sick. It's puzzling. And then he writes that he drives back to his home in Jay, and he says, drove back to Jay about 1 hour's drive. They had both signs ripped down already.
And those signs said the home of the heavyweight champion of the world.
Right.
Yep.
That's right. And he said, in my subconscious mind, I expected it. I used to drive all the way through Jay, and people used to wave at me. From then on, no one waved at me again.
Wow, what a world. So when you met him, you were in the corporate world, and you barely knew who Tommy was, and all you knew was that the hotel rooms that you were trying to get were booked up because of some fighter who was in town.
Right.
You heard when you sat down with him, when you finally met him, you started asking him questions that turned out he couldn't answer because he didn't know how to go about getting those answers, and that all seemed to you like an injustice. So you decided to help him get things clarified, and that's when you started running into one brick wall after another with the Nevada Commission and its ring physician, Dr. Margaret Goodman, and its commissioner, Mark Ratner, and the labs that conducted Tommy's blood tests. Was it your own impression from the very beginning that they focused on circling the wagons rather than providing truthful answers?
Well, at the time when Tommy was alive, I just asked the basic questions like anybody else would do. HIV was not in my world, but after meeting Tommy, HIV was a household word, along with coffee and I love you. And every conversation we had, every interview he did, every email, everything either began or ended with HIV. So I started to ask questions. Where are the results, Tommy? What tests did you do? And I just asked real simple questions. And after Tommy passed away, I started to ask my own questions directly with individuals. And I've actually found out a lot.
So in October, you sent me a 16-page brief about a lawsuit that you filed in Nevada against all the people we just mentioned. Take us through the questions that you've listed in that brief that you're asking people to answer for you.
Right. Well, I didn't know who is responsible. I simply sent out some nice emails to certain individuals trying to follow up on getting answers for Tommy, and I just kept on getting stonewalled, and I didn't know who was responsible or if anybody was responsible. So, I made contact with the CDC. They told me that, the labs don't diagnose. I made contact with the 3 test kit companies that the Nevada State Athletic Commission required of Tommy to take, and each one came back and said, we don't diagnose HIV. I then started to investigate a little bit more just by looking at the media outlets and what they posted on the internet, and I came across names like Hyatt, Dr. John Hyatt, Mark Ratner, and I've not met either of them. And then the commission came into play, and, I have been helped by the FDA. And so the questions that I was simply asking is that if I were to go and get a boxing license today, just like Tommy went to get a boxing license in 1996, what do you require to show whether somebody has the virus in you or not before you can get in the ring? And who is responsible for diagnosing? Because when Tommy passed away, Dr. Voy in Las Vegas clearly says through his attorney, not through Tommy or anything, because Tommy already passed away, he didn't diagnose. So my quest then was to find out who was responsible for making a negligent diagnosis because Tommy did not have HIV. So July 24th, actually, of 2014, I filed a lawsuit. I filed a lawsuit pro se, which means I'm on my own, and the defendants in the lawsuit are Quest, the labs, because they won't answer me the 2 questions that I'm asking. You're providing a printout to the commission. Does that mean that you are diagnosing Tommy with HIV? And secondly, we all know from media reporting and what Tony Holden has reported, who was one of Tommy's promoters, is that he was told by a third party, Mark Ratner, ringside 2 hours before the fight, without Tommy, that Tommy was not going to be able to fight. And so from that moment onwards, that's when he got diagnosed with HIV in Vegas and kicked out. So the defendants are Quest Diagnostics. I want to know some answers. Mark Ratner, if you're listening, Mark, Tommy likes you very much. But you cannot arrange for a secret meeting ringside to deliver personal health information on Tommy without Tommy being there. You just can't do that. In fact, you can't deliver any diagnosis. And above all, you now say you got a phone call. Well, who did you get that phone call from, Mark Ratner? Was it the janitor of the lab? Was it the garbage man? Give me the name of the person, because that person has diagnosed Tommy with something he never had. Then we've got Dr. Margaret Goodman, who comes into play now, and all these things have come out since Tommy had passed away. In 2007, she comes out with this media report again in USA Today, which goes viral when Tommy's trying to get his comeback, and she says quite publicly she went to Quest Labs, asked for Tommy's results, and the MD and the pathologist that she met with retrieved his archived results, and that they were unequivocal and positive, and she was allowed to do that by the commission. Well, the commission have got emails to Tommy saying that they were not responsible for Dr. Margaret Goodman to go even and meet with this guy called John Hyatt, Dr. John Hyatt. And then, Dennis, I then find out in the last few months that Dr. John Hyatt in Las Vegas, who was supposedly Tommy's physician, he's not even licensed.
He's not licensed, yes.
He's not even licensed to be a pathologist, and yet it's all over the media. So, Dr. John Hyatt, you're not a doctor. Why did you not retract that from the media frenzy, when you could have done? And why? And I'm asking you to do it now. Quest Labs, for example, who he worked for, in their correspondence, say that he never retrieved Tommy's results, right? So who's telling the truth here, Dennis? Is it John Hyatt, who is not an MD? If you want an MD, go study to be one, right? Or is it Dr. Margaret Goodman, saying that John Hyatt, Dr. John Hyatt, gave her the information? So that's another defendant. And the Nevada State Athletic Commission, you're using tests in 1996 that you made Tommy do, and still today, these 3 tests that the test kit companies have so kindly come back to me and said, our tests don't detect HIV infection. So I'm trying to protect the commission here, because they need to be asking for the proper testing if they want to make sure people do not contract HIV coming directly out of Tommy's blood in the ring. You're requesting also, and I'm talking to the Nevada Commission right now, you're also requesting the printout from Quest Lab that is not a diagnosis. That's not proof. No clinical lab diagnoses. And other clinical labs, Dennis, in the country have told me that, have emailed me that, but the Vegas Quest Labs refuses to answer that question, right? And the CDC have confirmed, clinical labs do not diagnose. That piece of paper that somebody's holding in their hand now with Tommy Morrison's name, whether it's family or promoter or a fake attorney that says, you've got HIV, that piece of paper does not mean you are diagnosed with HIV. And that's the piece of paper that the Nevada Commission are basing kicking Tommy out in 1996. But then again, since the beginning of this lawsuit, it's not even a piece of paper. It was all done by phone.
This is the Ringside Boxing Show from rainy Monterey, California. I'm Dennis Taylor, and we are streaming all over the world right now at radiomonterey.com. So also in your brief, you have the opinion of a doctor of your own, an expert witness.
Correct.
Who agreed to testify on your behalf. He's a Las Vegas pathologist, as I understand it, who has published more than 185 medical papers on various topics. Tell us about this guy who's in your corner, Dr. Henry Soloway, and what he said about your husband's diagnosis.
All right. It's not people just in my corner, Dennis. I have gone not to the media to get my answers, not to the doubters that are listening, to this radio show. I've gone to the experts. I've gone to real pathologists. I've gone, to the CDC. I've gone to the FDA. So, this particular person, if God's not in the miracle business, then this is pretty amazing. He has done an affidavit, which I will file this week. So just so that the defendants know that. And I hope the judge is listening to this. This is an affidavit that's signed by a very reputable, licensed, certified pathologist, and he says, and I'll read it out here. Okay, I've got his affidavit right here. The missing Social Security number, date of birth, and age on the requisition sheet all suggest that the sample received was not drawn at an APL outpatient center, which was Quest, or by any Quest APL personnel stationed elsewhere, but rather at some other location by non-APL personnel, probably a physician's office. The reason for this conclusion is that APL phlebotomists would have received formal discipline for failing to obtain these pieces of information. APL had no control over the procedures in private physicians' offices or in other settings where the sample might have been drawn. And then he goes on to say, since only 1 out of 1,000 individuals during 1996 was infected with the HIV virus throughout the United States, the odds are 999 to 1 that a random error would have resulted in a positive result from a random misidentification error. In all likelihood, the sample tested by APL was deliberately obtained from an individual known to be HIV positive, then deliberately labeled with Mr. Morrison's name and submitted to APL for testing, and this is the kicker, knowing that this criminal act would result in the cancellation of a boxing match that was scheduled to have taken place February 10th, 1996. And then one other little part, it says Mr. Morrison received no medication for his alleged HIV following his positive test results, and at least one subsequent test, the electron microscopic examination of blood cells, failed to detect the presence of HIV virus. And says Mr. Morrison lived for 17 years after the tests in question were performed. I conclude that Mr. Morrison was never infected with HIV virus. Accordingly, the tests, although performed on a sample labeled with Mr. Morrison's name, were performed upon an individual other than Mr. Morrison.
About 5 minutes left with Trisha Morrison, the widow of Tommy the Duke Morrison. If Tommy had taken care of business, as he always liked to say, against Arthur Weathers, he had been promised a $10 million fight. It was against Tyson, right? He was supposed to fight Tyson.
Yep, the third fight I found, actually, in the last few months, I found the contract between Don King and Tommy, and it was dated September 95. And he signed off on a $10 million contract, and the first fight was against Stormy Weathers, and the third fight would have ended up being against Mike Tyson.
So is this a $10 million lawsuit?
It's a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
And for anybody that's out there listening, I'm not asking for one penny. It's actually going to his children, to the mothers of his children, and for any promoter or manager that lost money out there, I'm really asking for apology letters from Dr. Margaret Goodman. You know, how dare she come out in the media with stuff. I'm asking for an apology letter from Dr. John Hyatt, he's not a doctor, and I'm asking the Nevada State Athletic Commission to read those test disclaimers that the test companies say, because you know, the commission is not protecting people because they're asking for the wrong tests. They need the subsequent test, which is what an expert witness said, to view whether that person actually has a virus in their body or not.
What's the day going to be like when all this is finally behind you? How much is going to lift off your shoulders?
It's going to lift a lot. Okay. I mean, already every single day, you know, I'm blown out of the water here. You know, it's amazing going through this lawsuit because of all the stuff that's coming out. You know, emails that they've received over the years from a fake attorney called Randy Lang, you know, sending these results through, which are exactly the same tests that don't detect HIV, right? You know, and finding out that in 1996, when he was medically suspended internationally indefinitely, did the world know that in 2006 it was lifted? why suddenly you say he's got this deadly disease and then list it? It's overwhelming. There will be a movie on this, and it will have all the truth.
We talked to Tommy 2 or 3 times on this show, and he was always great. He never gave us the impression that he was trying to claim he was a perfect guy. He went through a period of drug abuse and other issues in his life. He went to prison for a while, but in his final years, Trisha, he seemed to be doing all the right things. He opened a boxing gym for kids in the roughest part of Wichita. He created a summer camp for kids with cancer. What would you like people to know about Tommy Morrison?
He was a genuine human being that had been misdiagnosed, misunderstood, and he just had the biggest heart ever. And he loved his fans. He appreciated those that stayed close to him during this whole ordeal. A really good friend called Mike, and another good friend called Dale, and another good friend called Eric, and his best childhood friend called Andy. These are the guys that he really appreciated, and probably never had time to thank them. And he was just one of the guys. He was just a real human being, very intelligent, gave money wherever he could, would give his last penny. So just a really normal person with just a weird life.
If anybody out there has just tuned into this interview, the whole thing is going to be posted tomorrow at ringsideboxingshow.com. You can listen to the entire show. Before we leave, we got a few seconds left. Tell people about Tommy's 2 books and where they can get them.
Okay, the first book is My Boxing Career, and the profits go to his son Trey. The second book is My Darkest Years, and the profits go to his second son, Kenzie. So please buy those, because you're helping to support his 2 kids that he obviously isn't able to do so. And the third book, called My Unfinished Business, is still unfinished, and the profits of that will go to his first grandson called Sebastian.
Always great talking to you, Trisha. Thank you so much for being with us today on the Ringside Boxing Show, and best of luck with this lawsuit.
All right, Dennis, well, you make sure you give a copy to the judge in Las Vegas, because they're trying to boot me out, okay?
Okay. We'll do it. We'll send him something. Thank you so much, Trisha. Have a great day.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Trisha Morrison on the Ringside Boxing Show.